Hello and good evening all. We come to the end of our work week of underdogs, and we're finishing with, appropriately enough, Dogman 36's suggestion that clarified this week into something of a closer focus than originally intended. Aston Martin's presence in racing has been really rather consistent in the GT classes since the mid-2000s, and intermittent before that, but their participation in the faster prototype classes has been less so. After the divergence of prototypes and GTs in the 1960s, their participations at the sharpest end of the field were largely limited to contributing engines to other cars during the early Group C era, followed by a single-season entry of the AMR1, which already has a video on the channel. Starting in 2007, Aston got back into the prototype game, partnering with Lola on this, the B09/60. This vehicle was nevertheless one of compromises, because Aston wanted to take advantage of a rule change by the FIA that allowed the use of their big V12 from the immensely successful DBR9 GT1, and it didn't quite fit into the Lola tub. This meant it was necessary to use a non-standard X-Track gearbox rather than Lola's own unit, but it was a fairly quick car nonetheless, even out-qualifying the slowest of the Audi diesels at the 2008 Le Mans race. But Aston was still looking for more, and the 2009 season gave rise to this car, named either the B09/60 or the DBR1-2, depending on who you ask. I rather prefer the latter name because A, these Lola designations are dull and meaningless, and B, because the DBR1-2 name is a referential homage to the chassis that clinched Aston's World Championship in 1959, delivering 6 of their 7 race wins that year. I appreciate touches like that. There was something of a fracas about the name, actually, because Aston apparently wanted to just call it an Aston Martin without giving Lola any credit for the chassis, and Lola wanted some recognition. Or at least some cash from Aston to license the design. Thus, the homologation papers say one thing as submitted to the FIA/ACO, Aston's marketing materials and the chassis plate say another. In fairness, the chassis plate was applied in Banbury at the ProDrive factory, so naturally it says what Aston wants. Okay, from a design perspective, the majority of the mechanicals are all carried over from the outgoing B08. The carbon fiber monocoque was essentially unmodified. The road car-derived V12 in the X-Track box was the same, but the bodywork was substantially modified, and arguably improved, to more accurately reflect Aston's contemporaneous road car design language. And perhaps unsurprisingly, I think it was done quite well. Speaking of that power plant, it was a 6-liter, 60-degree V12, naturally aspirated, and producing 650 horsepower and a whopping 568 pound-feet of torque with a red line of 7,500 RPM. As it was production-derived and used a stock block and heads, it was a larger and heavier engine than those in use by Aston's competition, but this was made up for by the car running at a larger restrictor size, and thus at those higher power figures. Okay, everyone say this next part with me. We had double wishbone suspension with dampers, Coney in this point, on all 4 wheels, ventilated carbon ceramic brakes with 6-pot Brembo calipers, and magnesium BBS wheels that were Michelin tires. That's all pretty standard at this point. What really stood out about the car, however, was that shiny new bodywork, greatly improved over the B/08. From an engineering standpoint, the most notable change is the removal of the rear brake cooling snorkels, as the rear brakes were initially cooled by rear-facing, fan-driven intakes, although those would later be replaced with the NACA ducts seen here. They did go for a slightly lower drag design, most notable in the smaller rear wing, and removal of that, frankly, ugly nose thing that a lot of Lolas had at that point. There are better ways to design a toe box. We know this because look at the Peugeot 908, for instance, with which the Aston competed. Or, heck, look at the Aston itself. Just not necessary. Debuting at the preseason testing weekend at Paul Ricard in 2009, things didn't go very well at first. Tomasz Anga crashed one of the cars early on in the event, which meant that Aston needed another chassis from Lola, with whom they weren't exactly speaking at the time after their little disagreement. Fences were mended and a few design tweaks implemented, most notably the addition of swan neck rear wing mounts that several other competitors had debuted at Paul Ricard, with 2 cars ready for the season opener at Catalunya. With neither Audi Yost nor Peugeot racing in the regular Le Mans series, the Astons did rather well in their debut, with both cars quick and the 007 car winning the race overall despite a strong challenge from the Pescarolo. The second round at Spa was more challenging, as Peugeot showed up as a shakedown race before Le Mans, but the 007 car managed a solid 3rd place behind one of the French diesel spaceships and the Pescarolo. While I would love to show footage from the races that I'm mentioning, the ACO and the organization that owns IMSA, which is NASCAR Productions, at least that does all their video work, have both become incredibly pernicious in the past few weeks, with copyright striking everybody that has reused any footage, no matter how much it falls into standard fair use. So we're going to be avoiding tempting fate, both here and in the future. This does unfortunately mean that there will be no more IMSA year in review videos, which kind of sucks, unless some sort of agreement can be reached, which I doubt can be, because what does NASCAR/IMSA really care about this channel for? I've appealed the copyright. It's not a full copyright strike, it's whatever the one step down is, but under the principles of fair use and commentary, but I have no optimism about it being returned in anything but a negative fashion. What a wonderful platform this is. Indeed, the 007, driven by Jan Garros, Thomas Anga, and Stefan Murka, occupied a step of the podium every race that year in the Le Mans series, with a 2nd win at the Nürburgring, a 2nd place at Algarve, and a 2nd third to close the season at Silverstone, to give Aston the championship as well. The 009 car was not as lucky after its retirement to start the year, with its best finish 2nd place at the ring behind the 007 car. At Le Mans, the Astons, now 3 strong, the 3rd number being 008, were the fastest non-diesels yet again, but the Peugeot 908 that qualified on pole was the better part of 5 seconds ahead of the quickest Aston, who qualified 8th overall. The race went better for the team, though, with the Audi R15's underdevelopment costing them on both pace and handling, resulting in offs for 2 of the cars and 2 retirements, as well as 2 of the Peugeots damaging each other due to some shoddy pit release procedures. All of these circumstances combined for the 007 car to have all the luck for the team yet again, to finish 4th overall and 9 laps behind the winning number 9 Peugeot, but only 3 laps behind the best Audi, the first time Audi had been truly defeated at La Sarthe in a decade. Remember, we count the 03 Bentley win as half and half because it was really a derivative of the R8C underneath, and it ran with Yost personnel. This is good, because the DBR9 didn't have quite so good a race, and the only one that was entered was classified last in GT1 and 2nd from the bottom of the total order. The new Vantage GT2 was out midway. 2009 proved the high point for the car as well, though 2010 saw a Lowe's Home Improvement-sponsored machine contest the 12 Hours of Sebring and finish on the podium behind 2 908s, as well as a 2nd-place finish at the 8 Hours of Le Castellet season opener for the Le Mans series behind a new and improved Audi R15 TDI Plus. They missed Spa, Algarve, and the Hungaroring that had replaced the Nürburgring as the 4th round of the championship, and then finished the season with a 4th place at Silverstone, while Le Mans that year saw only 1 car out of 3 finish yet again, this time down in 6th behind an Oreca and the LMP2 winner. Not so good. These diminishing finishes, and yet more rule changes from the ACO, surprise of surprises, prompted Aston to start designing a replacement, the AMR1, with 1 spelled out O-N-E, to differentiate it from the Group C car, and Aston going against the grain with an open cockpit design, contrasting the new Audi R18 and the existing 908. The AMR1 was nevertheless not a successful design, due in no small part to a rushed development period. It only took 2 starts in the 2010 season, and both cars entered at Le Mans that year made it less than 5 laps before retiring. The 007 after more than 4 hours in the pits. Even had they been reliable, they were substantially slower both than the diesels, that's not surprising, and than the much svelter car they had replaced, and thus the DBR1-2 was dusted back off, having hardly time to gather any, in hopes of salvaging the season. Over on the other side of the Atlantic, Team Muscle Milk contested the ALMS season that year with the DBR1-2 in what may have been its best-looking livery. I know it's heresy to speak against the Gulf Oil colors, but someone did a heck of a good job with the black, white, red back when it didn't feel like everyone was painting their cars in some variation thereof. Dyson Racing proved the team's primary competition in their slightly older Lola chassis, running a Mazda power plant and taking wins in class or overall, depending on the presence of the big diesels, at Sebring, Lime Rock, and Baltimore to take first in the championship from the Muscle Milk Aston team. This because the Aston failed to finish at Sebring or Road Atlanta, but won almost every other race on the calendar not previously mentioned, apart from the Laguna Seca round, which was won by the factory Aston squad, who also finished third at Petit Le Mans behind the two Peugeots. 2011 was the last season for the car, and indeed for Aston Martin in prototype racing, as they shuttered the program in January of 2012. The demise of the program meant that there were 4 tubs left over from the planned 6-car production run of the AMR1, and that's where we got the tub for the Delta Wing. There was also a second sold to Pescarolo for their own LMP1 development work, but both of those are stories for a different time, the former of which was actually told on Wednesday. If I'd been a bit more circumspect in getting all of these scripts done well ahead of time, I could have reordered the videos for greater linear storytelling, but what fun would that be? Well, it's happened again. You've squandered another perfectly good week listening to Lensler, and for this week's call to action not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube, before we get to the call of action, I'm afraid I have to interrupt here in post-production about an hour before this video goes live, and apologize unreservedly that tomorrow's planned capstone video for Underdog Week won't be released on time. When I did Oddity Week last year, I was unemployed and had a good bit more time to write these things. And between now working full-time, the fact that this is actually one more video than I did last year for Oddity Week, so it's completely irrelevant. Between working full-time, the other vagaries of life, and needing to prepare for the hurricane that's supposed to be here on Sunday, well, other things do take precedence. So, my current plan is to release the video next Friday with more content than was originally planned, and anyone who guesses the subject, which is to say the car, correctly between now and next Wednesday, when I'll be recording the voiceover, will get a shout-out for their correctness. Now back to the call to action. Go listen to an episode or 2 of Car Talk this weekend. They're far more entertaining than I am. For those of you who didn't get it, the first part of that sentence was a reference to how they usually end their episodes. And do join us for one more video tomorrow night, going back in time to, in my opinion, the greatest Underdog prototype of the sport, and the original inspiration for Underdog Week. I'll shout out anyone who guesses it correctly between now and the video preview going live sometime tomorrow. That just leaves it for me to say, as always, thank you all for your time this evening, or whenever and wherever you are watching, and to wish you all good night and a good tomorrow.